Quasi, Haupa, Iatra. Petuoistima, Esta, Umer Hanu, Yaka Kukanish Hanu, Shrat Hanu. Dawa Good morning. I didn't bring my interpreter, so I have just greeted you in my traditional native language. I'm from Acoma, Pueblo in New Mexico, which is about 60 miles west of Albuquerque. We have the distinction of being the oldest continuous inhabited village in North America. Our village sits on top of a 350-foot sandstone mesa, and our people have been there since time immemorial. Our traditional stories, our oral history put us in that place at the time of creation. Also, within a 20-mile radius of where I live sits the Grants Mineral Belt. From the late 1940s to the early 1990s, the Grants Mineral Belt was the most intensively mined and milled area in the United States. We currently live among numerous mines and mills in the Grants Mineral Belt that have not been reclaimed. Many of them there as long as 50 years. On our neighbors to the west, the Navajo Nation, which is the largest Indian reservation in the United States in area, about the size of West Virginia, there are currently 1,300 abandoned mines on the Navajo Nation that have also not been cleaned up. The inspiration for this work that I do lies in the grassroots people that we represent back home. And up on the screen was one of those communities that have inspired my work, the village of Pueblo on Laguna Pueblo, which housed the largest open-pit uranium mine in the world from 1952 to 1982, the Jack Pile Mine. And as you can see up on the screen, the village of Pueblo sat 2,000 feet from this open-pit mine. A 30-year, 24-hour-a-day, 365-day per year operation. As the wind would blow, it would blow from an easterly to westerly direction. It would blow right into the village as people continued to live their traditional lifestyle of agriculture and livestock raising. As these radioactive overburden and waste blew into the village, today we have cancer clusters in our community, both mining and non-mining populations. The former miners that lived in this village tell horror stories of not being informed of the dangers of exposure to radionuclides when the industry was in its infancy. The miners were paid by the production that they produced as workers. Initially, when this open pit mine opened, it was basically a pick and shovel operation, so that these miners in the early 1950s were exposing themselves to what we call radon daughters. In the village, people continued to dry their meat and dry their fruit out in the open air. Blasting occurred 3 times a day for this 30-year time period, which destroyed the houses that people live in. Downwind from the uranium mine, people continued to graze their livestock, sheep and cattle. Wild animals that live in the mountains above the Jack Pile Mine would come down from time to time and would drink the tritium-tainted water that was left after the mining operation closed. It is these horror stories that have inspired my work. You know, this is not easy work to do, dealing with these human rights violations. As I said, this open pit mine, at its height of operation, as you're seeing up on the slide, This slide was taken in about the late 1970s, when the domestic the uranium industry was at an all-time high. Over 85% of our male workforce at one time or another worked in the mines. My father, uncles, cousins, aunts at one time or another, all working as uranium miners. You know, there's almost not one family at Laguna and Acoma that don't have a relative that at one time or another worked in the uranium mines. The Jack Pile mine in its life produced 24 million tons of ore. And the ore went to 90% of the ore went to one source, the Department of Defense of the United States, to make weapons of mass destruction during the Cold War. And most of you as youth who have grown up with 9/11, you know, it puzzles me that the United States of America has become this military police that can determine who can and who cannot have nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, in our backyard, 24 million tons of ore went to produce tens of thousands of nuclear weapons that are still, in many cases, not decommissioned around the world. With the capacity of this uranium that went to weapons of mass destruction, we could blow the world 100 times over. The irony of all this is that the uranium ore that came to be used to detonate the 2 atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Fat Man and Little Boy, came from Saskatchewan, from indigenous peoples' lands. The ore that was used to test the atomic weaponry in White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, came from the Navajo Nation. You know, and the United States government told these workers, many of them former veterans from World War II and Korea, that they were doing their patriotic duty as miners. Yet, when the industry went downhill in the early 1980s because of more stringent environmental regulation and laws, and the price of uranium going downhill, these mining companies just up and left us with the contaminated communities that we live in today, like Powhatan, in close proximity to the Jack Pile mine. There are 2 major tributaries that flow through the mine, and the dendritic patterns of these dry riverbeds during the height of our monsoon season in New Mexico in July, August, and September can become raging rivers. We have detected nuclear waste on the Rio Grande River in New Mexico, which is the lifeblood of our state, 250 miles away at a reservoir called Elephant Butte in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. So the naivety of the general population, you know, we have this perception that what we can't see can't hurt us. But as these radionuclides were blowing all over creation, as the pollution was transported through rivers in the area, we have contaminated the land in New Mexico. And as indigenous peoples, we have lived in this area, as I said, for time immemorial, and we're not going anywhere. We're stuck with this mess. One of the things that we have